G'day, it's Doc Joe from Store Review for Games here, and this is really the start of our entire journey. We're going to learn how to make our own modular synth. But to start with, let's talk about the Voltage Modular 2 environment. You really need to understand what's where so that you can get around it quickly. The good news is it's incredibly easy. Let's explore it. First of all, you've got a row of functions across the top. This is really your menus, your settings, and so forth. It's also how you save your presets. Let's look at this. Well, you could go new, and of course new will remove all of the modules that you've got in your system and will give you a blank canvas to work on. Great! You can also save your presets and recall presets through this control function here. Now, Modular 2 is a little bit different from other pieces of software which I've used in the past and how it saves off presets. For a start, you have this selector here, which is like a filter which categorizes a whole bunch of common presets related to a particular, if you will, package offering. Voltage has a really extensive store of offerings on the Cherry Audio site, and many of those offerings will group up all of their modules into presets, and then they'll make those presets available in one of these categories. For the moment, let's look at the core presets. Then you have got tagged information. You can actually group your presets into logical constructs. So you can categorize by the products, and you can categorize by what those products do. In this case, I'm just going to be looking at, say, ARPs, and here's all the ARPs that are in the core presets category. For the purposes of this tutorial, let's just look at the basics and open up the basic sawtooth synth. There it is, a very, very simple synth, and we will be getting into this in more detail later, but you can see that this wire has been preset to this little thing here, a sawtooth. But if I was to select a different patch, say the basic square, it's almost identical. This patch is almost identical, but it moves, the wires move over to the sawtooth. You can also go backwards and forwards between different patches, as you can see here, very quickly, easy to get around within that category that you've selected. You have got an undo and a redo feature, and this is really useful. This is the zoom feature. Now, if you're building a huge patch, a massive patch, you probably want to zoom out. The problem with that is, while you can see all of your patches together here on the screen, it does make it very difficult to wire up, especially if you've got bad eyesight like me. Here's 100%, and for the purposes of this tutorial, we're going to run it at around 120% because it'll be nice and easy to see on YouTube. There we go, nice and easy. Across here, you've got the settings function, and the settings function is actually really useful. I often, when I install this on a new computer, I will actually point this folder here to my network attached storage so that all of the computers that I'm using, no matter which one in the house, can actually connect to that. You can also replicate that information out to a cloud drive and back up all of your presets. Nice useful tip there. You don't want to lose your presets. You can spend hours and hours and hours on them. Don't lose them. Back them up. Make sure you know where they're going to be stored. If you have a very fast computer, you probably don't need to mess with this. I have experimented with it, and I can tell you, don't mess with it. You can slow things down. You can do more damage than is worth. But if you are needing to balance the processor speeds on your various computers, there are ways of doing that through here. The interface is quite useful. Again, there's you can change the style of the cabinet. For example, it's currently defaulted to wood. I could change it to simple and black, and I will do so for the rest of this tutorial. Cables are interesting. In this environment, the cables by default are relatively strong. As you can see, if you move your mouse over them, they sort of highlight slightly, and you'll get a little pulse line going through them, which shows you the direction of the circuitries. You can see the little dot going across there. However, you might want to change that up a bit. For example, rather than having 3D cables, you could just make them flat. Rather than animating the cables, you could just leave them as unanimated, which will save you the process time. I like to set this on. I'm going to turn the 3D cables back on. Move cables away, because as you're working around the synth and you're moving over things, you've got masses and masses of cables, which you will have from time to time. For example, I want to grab that gain knob. It just pushes the cable out of the way for you automatically. I think it's a really nice little animation. So you've got the cables functions there. Your account. So when you first get into Cherry Audio, you will have to create an account to download the software, and then you will link it to the installation. When you first sign into Cherry Audio, you'll get that. The good thing with that is anything that you buy in the Cherry Audio shop will automatically synchronize into all of your instances of Cherry Audio because you're hooked into this account. And finally, you do have the ability to alter the audio output and audio input, because Cherry Audio does take audio input as well as setting up your MIDI interfaces. I'm just going to leave that as standard. For the purposes of certainly the first parts of these tutorials, we're not going to use any MIDI input, we're just going to use the keyboard. Okay, so that's that top line there. You can, there's a number of other modes here which are quite useful, but this one is very, very useful, is changing the colors of the cables that you're going to be putting in place. Now, we'll drill down on that later. So that's enough about the top bar. That's really the stuff that you want to know about. Over here, you've got a column which shows you the assets that you've got to work with. By default, it will be the modules that you have installed. And as you can see, I have got heaps of them, and I still want to get more. You can buy additional modules for your synthesizer. That gives you many, many, many more options. However, Voltage Modular 2 Nucleus, which is the solution that you probably installed, is free. Currently it's free, and it has 22 modules, and they are pretty much all the modules that you possibly need to get a real good start in modular synthesis. It's a really good collection. The fun comes when you start getting new types of synthesizer elements, arpeggiators, lots of sequences. I love my sequences, and things that can randomize and do generative music. These are all things that you can experiment with. As you buy them, either as bundles of many of them together, or as individual pieces, just the piece that you need, they will automatically load into this column here. Now, to add a new module to your rack, and this area down here is called the rack, you simply click on the add. So let's add maybe a reverb. You can search by typing up here, and we're going to add a spring reverb. Just click it, and it adds to the currently selected cabinet. Each one of these rows is called a cabinet. Now, if I want to create a new cabinet, I could just drag that and bring it down, and hey presto, there's a new cabinet. Or I can drag it up, but you notice that empty cabinet stays there. To wire up this new element, I'm just going to put the line in from here, and I'm going to put the line out from there to there, and bingo, you now have got a fully functioning new piece of your synthesizer, just simply by searching for the module that you want, clicking on add, or dragging it into where you want it, and off you go. The other thing is really important is this idea of cabinets. Now, we're going to explore this in more detail in a later tutorial, but a cabinet is simply, think of it as a row of modules that you have put together. And the great thing with this particular environment is that you can not only save your entire preset, your entire synthesizer, you can also save just a cabinet, which means you can build components of your synthesizer, the sounds, the oscillators. I tend to use sequences and synths and sound generators as separate cabinets, and then you can just drag the entire cabinet in. Let me give you an example of that. I'm going to add or drag in the tri-state synth. If I put that in here, you can now see, there it is. I've got an entirely new sound environment right down there. I'm going to remove that cabinet above it. Bingo. So, very fast way of bringing together multiple pre-made sets of components for your synthesizer. You also have the ability to manipulate your MIDI knobs, if you will. We're not going to be looking at that anytime soon, so we'll leave that. And there's a notion in here called buses. Again, it's another more sophisticated feature for when you've got very complex synths, where you can assign, instead of having massive and massive cables going everywhere, you can say, this fits into a cable that runs through the entire back of my synthesizer effectively. That's the way you can think about it. And finally, you got the store, which is all the stuff you haven't yet bought. All the temptation is there, so don't go there. Okay, so that's how you get your modules and so forth. Now, across the top here, you have the inputs. This is how you get instructions from the physical world into your synthesizer. So for example, if you have a keyboard, a MIDI keyboard, you would be taking either the CV sources from the MIDI keyboard, or you could actually take the MIDI itself, which gives you even more. Most MIDI keyboards will automatically transfer into the poly sources as well. So you can think of this as all of the knobs that would be on all of the input devices on the back of your synthesizer that would connect it to the physical keyboard world. Transport's important as well. You can actually run voltage inside your digital analog workbench, your DAW. And in this case, you can actually wire up the play buttons of your DAW into this instrument. So you can treat it as an instrument. You can even set the clock rates and so forth. That's all done from here. Audio sources, it is possible to have audio coming in to this synthesizer, which you can then apply effects onto. Another advanced session which we might look at sometime in the future. Finally, you've got your volume control, and your two voltage lines, your left and your right. Now, if you don't have a right, everything will go to mono. If you do have a right, it will be fine, mono. Another really useful thing within this area here is the rec button. When you push the rec button, Voltage will start taking all of the audio that it's generating, no matter how it's being generated, and it will put it into a standard WAV file on your computer's hard drive. So when you're experimenting, turn rec on, have some fun with it, and then turn it off again when you are recabling things, because sometimes you just never know what you get. Certainly, sometimes you can make a little flash on the keyboard or twiddle some knobs on your device, and suddenly you've got this masterpiece. But if you don't record it, you might not be able to remember how you got there. So do record it. This little rack along here is really useful. Basically, you can take a knob on pretty much any control on anywhere in your synthesizer, and you can associate one or more of them to this performance knob. So let me give you an idea of that. We might take this level, right click, and you could assign it to knob 1. You can see that knob 1's now changes to match that. But watch what happens. If I change this knob here, that will also change. But what happens if I wanted that input level to also change, say, the frequency over here of this oscillator? And more on oscillators later. We could assign that also to input level. Now watch. They change at the same time. What's really good here is you can then assign this to a MIDI controller, to a knob on one of your MIDI controllers, which means you can actually affect multiple aspects of your entire synth framework just by twisting one knob. It's particularly useful for changing tempo, for changing sequences, actually switching between sequences, and a whole range of other things. You have a total of 9 knobs and 4 buttons. Buttons work in a similar way, but of course you wire them up to a button somewhere on the system. Extremely useful. You can, in addition to that, you can actually manually wire up individual controls, knobs, buttons, or whatever, directly to your MIDI synthesizers, your MIDI controllers as well, which is fantastic. So you have huge amounts of control for performance. And finally, we get down to the cabinets. Well, we've sort of talked about cabinets very, very briefly. The cabinets are where you put your modules and how you wire them up. So you can drag modules around the place within a cabinet. You can drag them to a different cabinet if you so wish. I tend to be very organized in my cabinets, or I try to be organized. I tend to put my mixer on my very first cabinet. So if you've got multiple sounds that you're going to be working with, you might want to have a mixer right on the top row. That's just force of habit. I like to put it right at the top row because it's usually the finishing elements of my synthesizer. Underneath that, I would normally put my sequencer and then any sound that sequencer is generating. So if I've got a drum machine, a drum sequencer, I might put all of my drums on one entire rack. If I've got a synthesizer, a very simple synthesizer like we have here, it would go on one rack. Something that's quite useful to know is you can actually insert modules between other modules, and they just move out of the way. So much simpler than tightening screws and putting pivots and so forth. The other thing which is quite useful is aligning things in the rack. You can align them left or right. I like to go auto-aligned left, which means all of my stuff is always going to be aligned across there. So if I was to add, let's say, Navigator, put it over there, it's going to snap back into that position nice and easily. You can have as many racks as you want. I've not really experimented with the other upper limits of it, but quite frankly, I haven't needed to. I've run out of compute power before I've run out of rack space, cabinet space. So that's it. That's the overall environment. It's incredibly easy. One other thing that's quite useful to know though is of course the save button. So I could save off your preset. And just recapping on that, when you save a preset, you choose the collection it's going to go into, you choose the category, and then you give it the name. And if you'd like, you can give it keywords to search for. Strongly recommend you do that. When you do close down Voltage, down to the desktop, the next time you open it, it will be in exactly the same space of where you left it. So that's an overview of the Voltage Modular environment. I know that was a little bit boring, but it is important to know how to get around. So if you have any questions on it, please put them in the comments below. Thank you very much, and I'll see you in the next tutorial where we get to work and make our very first synth.